The morning sun blazed across the dusty main street of Cedar Falls, casting long shadows from the weathered storefronts and saloons that lined the thoroughfare. Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her dark wool dress, its high collar fastened tight despite the rising heat, and stepped onto the wooden boardwalk outside the schoolhouse. The familiar weight of judgmental stares followed her movement. The widowed schoolteacher, too proud to remarry, too stubborn to leave. She had arrived in this desolate corner of the territory 3 years prior, shortly after burying her husband back east. The consumption had taken him slowly, leaving her with debts and a tarnished reputation. A woman who couldn't keep her husband alive, whispered the gossips. Cedar Falls had offered escape and employment, though it brought its own trials. Inside the one-room schoolhouse, dust motes danced in the slanted light streaming through windows she'd cleaned just yesterday. 23 students, ages 6 through 16, would soon fill these benches. Eleanor arranged her materials methodically: slate boards, precious chalk, the few tattered primers the town council had grudgingly provided. Each movement was precise, controlled, armor against the chaos that threatened to seep through her carefully maintained composure. The children began arriving as the church bell tolled 8 o'clock. Farm boys with sun-bleached hair and patched overalls, daughters of merchants in calico dresses, the banker's son in his pressed shirt, all equal under her stern but fair instruction. She greeted each with a nod, noting Tommy Morrison's absence. The boy hadn't missed a day all term. "Good morning, class," Eleanor announced, her voice carrying the authority she'd cultivated through years of practice. "Please open your readers to page 37. The morning progressed with recitations and arithmetic, but an undercurrent of unease rippled through the room. Children whispered when they thought she wasn't watching, casting nervous glances toward Tommy's empty seat. During the noon recess, Eleanor cornered Mary Sullivan, Tommy's closest friend. "Where is Thomas today? Mary?" The girl's freckled face crumpled. "My PA says Tommy's PA got killed. Miss Whitmore. Found him out by Coyote Creek yesterday morning. All shot up. Ma wouldn't say more, but I heard her telling Mrs. Henderson it weren't no accident." Eleanor's spine stiffened, though she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for telling me. Mary, run along now." Violence had been creeping into their isolated community like a disease. 3 months ago, a homesteader disappeared. Last month, the telegraph operator was beaten near senseless. Now this. Eleanor had lived through the war years back east, had seen what unchecked brutality could spawn. The familiar taste of fear, metallic and sharp, filled her mouth. That afternoon, she dismissed class early, unable to concentrate on lessons while Tommy Morrison was somewhere mourning his murdered father. The children scattered quickly, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Eleanor remained at her desk, grading papers by lamplight as shadows lengthened outside. The scratch of her pen and the tick of the wall clock were her only companions. This was her life. Ordered, solitary, safe. She'd built these walls deliberately, brick by brick. After James died, better to be alone than vulnerable, better to be respected than loved. The saloon across the street came alive as darkness fell, raucous laughter and tinny piano music drifting through her windows. Eleanor closed them firmly. Though the stifling heat made the small room nearly unbearable, she would not invite that world into her sanctuary. As she prepared to leave, voices outside made her pause. Through the window, she glimpsed Sheriff Watson with several men, their faces grim in the lamplight. "Can't keep going like this," one said. "Morrison makes 4 this year." "You think it's the Donnelly gang?" another asked. Watson spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Could be someone else entirely. Either way, we need every able-bodied man ready. Time to circle the wagons. "What about Hartwell? Man knows killing better than anyone in 3 counties. Eleanor knew that name. Jed Hartwell, the hermit who lived in the foothills, a former Union soldier who'd arrived 2 winters ago and promptly made it clear he wanted nothing to do with civilization. Town gossip painted him as everything from a war hero to a cold-blooded killer. Children dared each other to approach his cabin, though none ever did. Watson laughed harshly. That bastard won't help nobody but himself. Man's got ice for blood and stone for a heart. We're better off without him. The men dispersed, and Eleanor finally emerged from the schoolhouse. The walk to her small rented room above the millinery shop was only 3 blocks, but she felt exposed, vulnerable. Every shadow could hide a threat. She quickened her pace, keys ready in her hand, safe in her Spartan quarters. Eleanor unpinned her hair and let it fall past her shoulders, her one remaining vanity. In the mirror, she saw what everyone else did, a woman of 32, still handsome but fading, lines of sorrow etched around green eyes that had seen too much. No wonder the town matrons whispered. What kind of woman chose this existence? She prepared for bed mechanically, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she lay listening to the night sounds, coyotes howling in the distance, wind rattling her windows, drunken cowboys stumbling past. Somewhere out there, Tommy Morrison was learning that the world was cruel and arbitrary, and somewhere else, a killer walked free. The next morning brought no relief. Eleanor arrived early to find a cluster of mothers outside the schoolhouse, their face pinched with worry. Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, appointed spokesperson. We're concerned about the children's safety. Perhaps school should be suspended until this unpleasantness is resolved. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Education doesn't stop for unpleasantness, Mrs. Henderson. The children need structure now more than ever. But surely, I assure you, they're perfectly safe under my supervision. Her tone brooked no argument. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare. The women exchanged glances but dispersed. Eleanor knew she'd pay for that dismissal later, at church socials where she'd be pointedly excluded from conversations, at the general store where her orders would mysteriously be delayed. The price of refusing to play their games. Tommy Morrison returned that day, his young face aged by grief. Eleanor gave him no special treatment. He wouldn't want it, but she let him skip recitations and didn't comment when tears dropped onto his slate during arithmetic. 2 weeks passed intense routine. Then came the day Eleanor's ordered world cracked at its foundation. She was purchasing supplies at Garrison's general store when he entered. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations died. Women clutched their baskets closer. Jed Hartwell stood in the doorway like something carved from the landscape itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dusty leather and carrying the weight of unspoken violence. His face was all harsh angles beneath a week's growth of beard. Eyes the color of winter sky. Those eyes swept the store once, cataloging threats and exits with military precision. Eleanor had never seen him this close. The reality was more unsettling than rumors suggested. This wasn't just a hermit or a bitter veteran. This was a man who'd been forged in war's crucible and come out transformed into something that didn't quite fit in civilized company. He moved to the counter, spurs jingling softly. Coffee, ammunition, tobacco, he told Garrison in a voice like gravel. The shopkeeper scurried to fill the order while everyone else found urgent business elsewhere. Everyone except Eleanor, who discovered herself directly in Hartwell's path to the counter. Excuse me, she said coolly, refusing to be intimidated. He looked down at her, truly looked, not the dismissive glance she expected. Something flickered in those Arctic eyes. Ma'am. He stepped aside, but not far enough. She had to brush past him, catching scents of leather, gunpowder, and something wild. Her pulse quickened traitorously. You're the schoolmarm, he said, not a question. Miss Whitmore, she corrected, chin lifting. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Heard you're teaching Morrison's boy to read and cipher. Among others, yes. Waste of time. Boy needs to learn to shoot. Way things are going. Eleanor's temper flared. Education is never a waste. Mr. Hartwell, it's what separates us from animals. His gaze sharpened, and for a moment she glimpsed something unexpected. Intelligence, maybe even humor. That's so. Well, Miss Whitmore, I've seen plenty of educated men act worse than any animal, and I've seen animals show more humanity than most folks deserve." Before she could respond, he collected his purchases and strode out, leaving Eleanor oddly shaken. She'd expected crude ignorance, not philosophy delivered in that rough voice. Garrison leaned over the counter conspiratorially. "Best steer clear of him. Miss Whitmore. Man's dangerous. Killed 20 rebels at Antietam. They say, maybe more after." Eleanor gathered her supplies. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Garrison." But as she walked back to the schoolhouse, she couldn't shake the encounter. Something about Jed Hartwell didn't align with the simple narrative the town had constructed. Those eyes held depths, shadows that spoke of more than mere violence. That night, as she prepared lessons by lamplight, Eleanor found herself thinking about contradictions, about educated men acting like animals, about a killer who noted a grieving boy's education, about the walls people built and the reasons they built them. Outside, the desert wind howled, bringing the scent of sage and the promise of storm. Change was coming to Cedar Falls, whether they wanted it or not. And Eleanor Whitmore, for all her careful control, couldn't shake the feeling that her ordered life was about to become very complicated indeed. She touched the window glass, still warm from the day's heat, and wondered what it cost a man to choose isolation so complete. Then, because such thoughts were dangerous, she returned to her papers and refused to wonder anything at all. But in her dreams that night, winter sky eyes watched her from the shadows, and a voice like distant thunder asked questions she couldn't answer. The scream shattered the afternoon quiet like glass against stone. Eleanor dropped her chalk, the equation on the blackboard forgotten as she rushed to the window. In the dusty street, a crowd gathered around someone on the ground. "Stay in your seats," she commanded her students, though several had already pressed their faces to the windows. "Martha Sullivan, you're in charge. Anyone who leaves this room will answer to me." She flew down the steps, her boots clattering on wood. The crowd parted reluctantly as she pushed through. At its center lay Samuel Brennan, one of her older students, blood seeping through his torn shirt. His face was chalk white, eyes rolling with pain. "What happened?" Eleanor knelt beside him, her hands already assessing the damage, a deep gash along his ribs, possibly from a knife. "Found him out by the water tower," Jake Morrison said. "There was a fight. Those drifters that came through last week. They jumped him and 2 others, took their horses, everything." Eleanor pressed her handkerchief to the wound, but blood soaked through immediately. "Someone fetch Dr. Holbrook. Doc's out at the Hendricks Ranch," someone replied. "Won't be back till tomorrow." The boy moaned, clutching Eleanor's hand. She looked around at the useless crowd. Good people, but none with battlefield experience. None who'd seen men bleed out in meadows far from home. "Then get Hartwell," she heard herself say. Silence fell like a hammer blow. Sheriff Watson pushed forward. "Now, Miss Whitmore, that's not—" "That man served as a battlefield medic. He knows wounds." She fixed Watson with a glare that could strip paint. "Unless you'd prefer we watch Samuel die for the sake of propriety." Watson's mouth worked soundlessly. Eleanor stood, blood on her hands. "I'll go myself." "You can't, Mrs." Henderson gasped. "A lady, alone, to that man's cabin?" "Then someone come with me." Eleanor scanned the crowd. Not one man met her eyes. "I see. Very well." She turned back to Samuel, instructing the women on keeping pressure on the wound, then strode to the livery stable. 10 minutes later, she was mounted on a borrowed mare, riding hard toward the foothills where Hartwell's cabin squatted like a dark thought against the landscape. The journey took an hour through rough terrain. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat soaked through her dress. She'd never ridden alone this far from town. But anger drove her forward, anger at the cowardice of men who'd rather let a boy die than face their fears. Hartwell's cabin appeared suddenly around a bend, rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, and absolutely no welcome. A rifle barrel emerged from a window before she'd even dismounted. "That's far enough." Eleanor raised her hands. Mr. Hartwell, it's Eleanor Whitmore. The schoolteacher. I need your help. A long pause. Then the door opened, and he stepped onto the porch, rifle still in hand. He looked like something wild that had learned to walk upright, all coiled muscle and barely leashed violence. You're a long way from your schoolhouse. Miss Whitmore? Samuel Brennan is dying. Knife wound. Doctor. Holbrook is away. She met his gaze steadily. They say you were a medic. Something shifted in his expression. They say a lot of things. Will you help or not? Because if you're going to refuse, do it now so I can get back to watching a 17-year-old boy bleed to death. He studied her for a moment that stretched like taffy. Then he set the rifle aside. Wait here. He disappeared inside, emerging with a leather satchel. Without a word, he saddled a raw-boned gelding with economical movements. Eleanor noticed scars on his hands, precise and deliberate. Shrapnel, perhaps, or worse. They rode back in silence, Hartwell setting a punishing pace she struggled to match, but she'd be damned if she'd show weakness now. The crowd scattered when they arrived, though whether from respect or fear, Eleanor couldn't tell. Hartwell knelt beside Samuel, his examination swift and professional. Those scarred hands moved with surprising gentleness. Needs cleaning and stitching. Boil water. Clear alcohol, whiskey will do. Clean cloth. He glanced up at Eleanor. You squeamish? No. Good. You'll assist. They worked in the schoolhouse, desks pushed aside to make room. Eleanor watched Hartwell transform from hermit to healer. He cleaned the wound with steady hands, threading a needle with catgut as naturally as breathing. Hold him, he instructed. This will hurt. Eleanor braced Samuel's shoulders while Hartwell worked. The boy screamed once, then fainted. A mercy. She watched the needle flash in and out, precise as her own embroidery, but serving a grimmer purpose. You've done this before, she observed. Too many times. He didn't look up. Hold that lantern closer. She did, studying him in the yellow light. The harsh lines of his face softened with concentration. This close. She could see gray threading through dark hair, a thin scar along his jaw. He smelled of leather and wood smoke and something indefinably male that made her pulse skip. There. He tied off the final stitch, then dressed the wound with clean bandages. He'll live if infection doesn't set in. Keep the wound clean. Change the dressing twice daily. I'll leave some carbolic acid. He packed his supplies while Eleanor settled Samuel on a makeshift cot. When she turned back, Hartwell was watching her with that unsettling intensity. You did well, he said. Most women would have fainted. I'm not most women, Mr. Hartwell. No, he agreed quietly. You're not. They stood there, something unspoken crackling between them like heat lightning. Then voices outside broke the spell. Parents come to collect their children. Sheriff Watson wanting a report. Hartwell moved toward the door, but Eleanor caught his sleeve. Thank you. He looked down at her hand on his arm, and she quickly withdrew it. Boy needed help. Nothing more to it. Still, the town owes you. The town owes me nothing. His voice turned hard, and I'll keep it that way. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching him go, her arm still tingling where she'd touched him. Quite a performance. Sheriff Watson materialized beside her, tobacco juice staining his mustache. Playing nurse to the hermit's doctor, people will talk. Let them. Eleanor turned to face him. Where were you when Samuel needed help? Where were any of you? Watson's face darkened. Now see here. Good evening, Sheriff. She shut the door in his face. The next days passed in a blur of nursing Samuel and managing frightened parents. True to his word, Hartwell had left carbolic acid and detailed instructions in surprisingly neat handwriting. Eleanor followed them religiously. And slowly, Samuel improved. But the attack had shaken the town's fragile sense of security. More families talked of leaving. The school attendance dropped by half. Those who remained jumped at shadows. A week later, Eleanor made a decision that surprised even her. She packed a basket with fresh bread, preserves, and a book, then rode out to Hartwell's cabin. He was chopping wood when she arrived, shirt discarded in the heat. She'd never seen a man's bare torso in broad daylight. Her late husband had been modest to the point of prudishness, but Hartwell moved with an animal grace that made her mouth go dry. Scars mapped stories across his skin, a puckered bullet wound near his shoulder, saber slashes across his ribs, and others she couldn't identify. He straightened when he saw her, reaching for his shirt. "Miss Whitmore, I brought a thank you." She held up the basket, feeling suddenly foolish. "For Samuel." He pulled on his shirt, movements sharp. "I told you. You told me the town owes you nothing, but I'm not the town." She set the basket on his porch. "I'm a woman saying thank you. There's a difference." He stood there, axe loose in his hand, clearly at a loss. Eleanor suspected no one had thanked him for anything in a very long time. "There's also this." She pulled out the book. Leaves of Grass, well worn from multiple readings. "You said educated men act like animals. I thought you might appreciate Whitman's perspective on the subject." He took the book carefully, as if it might bite. "You're assuming I can read." "I'm assuming a man who writes medical instructions with perfect spelling has hidden depths." She mounted her horse before he could respond. "Good day, Mr. Hartwell." She was halfway back to town before she allowed herself a small smile. The look on his face, surprise mixed with something that might have been pleasure, was worth any gossip that would follow. That evening, as Eleanor graded papers by lamplight, she found herself thinking about scars and silence, about the way his hands could be gentle despite their history of violence, about the careful distance he maintained from the world and what it might be protecting. Outside her window, a coyote howled at the rising moon. She thought of Hartwell alone in his cabin, perhaps reading Whitman by firelight, perhaps thinking of her. The thought should have disturbed her. Instead, she felt something loosen in her chest, some tight-wound spring that had been coiled since James died. It was dangerous, this feeling, but after years of safe isolation, danger held its own appeal. She touched the window glass, still warm from the day's heat, and wondered if he was doing the same. Then she forced herself back to her papers, to the safe world of arithmetic and spelling where everything had correct answers and nothing could surprise her. But when she finally slept, she dreamed of scarred hands gentle on her skin, and woke, gasping in the dark, with her pulse racing and her body aching for something she couldn't name. Change had come to Cedar Falls, and Eleanor Whitmore was beginning to suspect she'd invited it in herself. The empty desks multiplied like missing teeth. Where once 23 students filled Eleanor's classroom, now only 12 remained. The Morrison family had left for California, the Brennans. Despite Samuel's recovery, headed back east, fear was bleeding Cedar Falls dry. Eleanor stood at the blackboard, teaching geography to children who flinched at every sound. Little Mary Sullivan hadn't spoken since her uncle disappeared 3 days ago, the 6th man to vanish without a trace. "Miss Whitmore." Timothy Henderson raised a trembling hand. "My PA says we might leave too. Says it ain't safe no more." Eleanor set down her chalk carefully. "And what do you think, Timothy?" "I'm scared," the boy admitted. "What if the bad men come for us?" She looked at their frightened faces, children forced to grow up too fast. "Fear is natural," she said finally, "but we can't let it rule us. We must be prepared. Yes, but also strong." "How?" Mary Sullivan's voice was barely a whisper. Eleanor made a decision that would later prove pivotal. "Tomorrow, we'll have a special lesson. About staying safe, about protecting ourselves." That evening, she stood again at Hartwell's door, this time steeling herself for rejection. He opened before she could knock, as if he'd sensed her approach. "Miss Whitmore." No surprise in his voice now. She'd visited twice more since the book delivery, brief exchanges, each charged with unspoken possibility. "I need your help again." She lifted her chin, ready to fight. The children need to learn self-defense. Basic things: how to run, hide, maybe use simple weapons. Their parents are too frightened to teach them properly. His expression closed off. No. These are children. Mr. Hartwell, innocent. There's no such thing. He turned away, but she caught his arm. Please, they're terrified. They need to feel they have some control. He looked down at her hand, and she felt the muscle tension under her fingers. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. A long moment passed. Night sounds filled the silence. Crickets, wind through juniper, a distant owl. Finally, he shook off her touch. I won't teach children to kill. Miss Whitmore, don't ask me again. The door closed with finality. Eleanor stood on the dark porch. Anger and something else, disappointment, churning in her stomach. She'd begun to think there was more to him than walls and rejection. The ride back to town felt longer than usual. Storm clouds massed on the horizon, promising rain that would likely never come, like everything else in this God-forsaken place. All threat, no relief. The next morning brought worse news. 2 more families gone in the night, including the Hendersons. Eleanor's remaining 8 students huddled together like sheep sensing wolves. She abandoned regular lessons, instead teaching them practical skills: how to bind wounds, signal for help, find water in the desert. But it felt inadequate, like bringing a candle to fight the dark. That Sunday, she attended church as always, enduring Reverend Pritchard's fire and brimstone sermon about sin bringing punishment upon them. The congregation was half its usual size, fear written on every face. After the service, the church ladies cornered her. Mrs. Garrison, self-appointed moral guardian, led the charge. Miss Whitmore, we've been patient, but your associations are becoming problematic. Eleanor kept her expression neutral. I'm not aware of any associations, Mrs. Garrison. Don't play coy. Mrs. Watson joined in, eager to wound. You've been seen riding alone to that hermit's cabin multiple times. To thank him for saving Samuel Brennan's life. Or have you forgotten that your husbands refused to help? Mrs. Garrison's face pinched. A proper woman would have sent a note. A proper woman would have let the boy die. Eleanor let ice creep into her voice. How fascinating. Is there anything else? Your position here depends on maintaining moral standards. Mrs. Watson hissed. The school board can find another teacher. Eleanor stood. If they'd prefer someone who values reputation over children's lives. She swept out, leaving shocked whispers in her wake. But her hands shook as she walked home. The position was all she had. Lose it, and she'd have nothing. That night, sleep eluded her. She stood at her window, watching heat lightning flash across distant mountains. The air felt charged, dangerous, like something building toward explosion. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps on the stairs outside. Slow, deliberate. Her door had no lock, just a simple latch. Eleanor grabbed the poker from her small fireplace, heart hammering. The footsteps stopped outside her door. The handle turned slowly. Who's there? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The door pushed open. Sheriff Watson stood there, whiskey fumes preceding him. His eyes held an ugliness she'd seen before in men who thought women existed for their convenience. Evening, Miss Whitmore. Thought we should talk about your attitude. Get out. She raised the poker. Now. He smiled, stepping inside. No need for that. Just want to explain how things work here. You act grateful, follow the rules, and everyone stays happy. Keep causing trouble. He shrugged. Well, accidents happen, even to school teachers. Is that a threat, Sheriff? It's advice. He moved closer. You're a handsome woman, Eleanor. Shame to see you waste yourself on principle. She swung the poker. He dodged, laughing, but the move put him off balance. Eleanor darted past him, flew down the stairs, and ran into the street. Come back here. Watson stumbled after her. Just being friendly. Eleanor ran toward the only place her instinct said was safe. Through the town, past the last buildings, into the desert night. Miles flew beneath her feet, stones cutting through thin shoes. When Hartwell's cabin finally appeared, she pounded on the door like her life depended on it. He opened with a gun in hand, took one look at her, hair wild, dress torn, feet bleeding, and pulled her inside. What happened? No warmth in the question, but his hand on her arm was steady. Sheriff Watson, She couldn't finish. Suddenly shaking, something dangerous flashed in Hartwell's eyes. He set down the gun, lit a lantern, then knelt to examine her feet. You ran here barefoot? I had shoes. Lost them somewhere. He retrieved a basin of water, clean cloths. His touch was clinical as he cleaned cuts, pulled out thorns. But Eleanor saw the tension in his jaw, the carefully controlled movements. Did he hurt you? Quiet question, but loaded. No, I got away. Good. He wrapped her feet with practiced efficiency. You can't go back tonight. I have nowhere else. You'll stay here. He stood. Take the bed. I'll sleep outside. I can't put you out. Eleanor. Her first name on his lips stopped her cold. Take the bed. She did, sinking onto the rough mattress that smelled of him, leather and wood smoke and man. Through the window, she watched him settle by the dying fire outside, rifle across his knees, standing guard. Sleep took her despite everything. She woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Hartwell sat at the table, the book she'd given him open before him. Whitman, he said without looking up, writes about containing multitudes. She sat up slowly, aware of her disheveled state. Yes, man's got a point. He closed the book, finally meeting her eyes. Coffee's ready. They sat in surprising, comfortable silence, sharing the simple meal. Eleanor felt she should be mortified, spending the night in a man's cabin, hair unbound, reputation surely in tatters. Instead, she felt safe. I can't go back, she said eventually. Not after last night. No, he agreed. Watson's type doesn't forget humiliation. I'll have to leave town, find another position. The thought exhausted her. Hartwell poured more coffee. Or you could fight. She laughed bitterly. Fight? I'm one woman against cowards and bullies. He leaned back. You showed more courage than any man in that town. Don't sell yourself short. Courage doesn't pay bills or protect against accidents. He studied her. What if you weren't alone? Eleanor's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying Watson overplayed his hand. The town needs you more than they need him. And if someone made that clear, he shrugged, things might change. You'd do that? After how they've treated you? Not for them. His gaze held hers. For someone who brings books and says thank you, who runs barefoot through the desert rather than submit. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Jed, I'll ride back with you. Make sure Watson understands the new rules. After that, he stood. We'll see. An hour later, they rode into Cedar Falls together. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Eleanor kept her chin high. Hartwell a solid presence beside her. Watson waited outside the sheriff's office, deputies flanking him. His smirk faltered when he saw Hartwell. Morning, Sheriff. Hartwell's voice carried across the street. Heard you paid Miss Whitmore a visit last night. Just a friendly... No. Hartwell dismounted with deliberate calm. Nothing friendly about it. Here's what happens now. You resign. Leave town. Today. Watson's face purpled. You threatening an officer of the law? I'm explaining consequences. Hartwell stepped closer. You crossed a line. Either you leave vertical, or you leave horizontal. Your choice. The deputies backed away. Watson's hand twitched toward his gun, then stilled as he met Hartwell's eyes. Whatever he saw there drained the color from his face. One woman ain't worth. That one is, no doubt in Hartwell's voice. Decide. Watson broke. Within an hour, he was packed and gone, riding hard for anywhere else. The deputies, suddenly leaderless, looked to Hartwell, who just shook his head and walked away. Eleanor found him later at the schoolhouse, fixing the broken step she'd been meaning to repair. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Yeah, I did. The town will talk. Let them." She watched him work. This complicated man who quoted poetry and faced down sheriffs, who chose isolation but stepped forward when needed. "Thank you," she said simply. He did look up then, and something in his expression made her heart race. "Don't thank me yet. Eleanor, this isn't over." Watson was a symptom, not the disease. He was right. But for now, she was safe, and she wasn't alone. In a frontier where both were rare as rain, it was enough. That night, she stood at her window, door now properly barred, and saw a figure in the shadows below. Standing guard again. She pressed her palm to the glass, a wordless message. The figure raised a hand in response, then melted back into darkness. Not alone, she thought. Whatever came next, she wasn't alone. The crescent moon hung like a silver blade in the desert sky. Eleanor stood outside the church hall, still trembling from the humiliation inside. The monthly church social had become her trial by fire, whispers following her every movement. Women turning their backs with theatrical precision. "Jezebel. Mrs." Garrison had hissed, loud enough for all to hear. Parading around with that killer, spending nights at his cabin. What kind of example is that for our children? Reverend Pritchard himself had suggested she might reflect on her recent choices and their impact on her spiritual standing. The final blow came when the church board voted to revoke her Sunday school teaching privileges for moral concerns. Eleanor had endured it all with rigid composure until young Mary Sullivan, prompted by her mother, refused to take communion from Eleanor's hands. That small cruelty, from a child she'd taught to read, finally broke through her defenses. She'd fled into the night, dignity in tatters, and now stood alone beneath the stars, fighting tears of rage and hurt. 3 months ago, she'd been respectable if pitied. Now, thanks to her association with Jed Hartwell, she was a pariah. "Eleanor," she spun to find him emerging from the shadows, his presence both unexpected and somehow inevitable. He'd taken to appearing when she needed him most, as if some invisible thread connected them. "What are you doing here?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Saw you leave. Figured it wasn't by choice." He studied her face in the moonlight. "What happened?" "Nothing that matters." She turned away, not wanting him to see her weakness. "Eleanor," softer now. "Tell me." The gentleness undid her. Words spilled out. The accusations, the shunning, Mary Sullivan's rejection. Through it all, Jed stood silent, but she felt the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. "I'm destroying my life," she finished. "Everything I built here, everything I worked for, gone, because I dared to treat you as human." "Then they never deserved you." His voice held an edge sharp enough to cut. "Pack of hypocrites and cowards. That doesn't help me pay rent or buy food when they dismiss me." She laughed bitterly. "I'm too proud to beg, but pride doesn't fill an empty stomach." He moved closer, and suddenly Eleanor was aware of him in a way that stole her breath. The moonlight carved his features in silver and shadow, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. "You could leave," he said quietly. "Start over somewhere else." "And go where? I have nothing. Jed, no family, no savings, no—" "You have me." The words hung between them like a challenge. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you saying?" Instead of answering, he reached out, fingers ghosting along her jaw. "You know what I'm saying." She did. God help her. She did. The attraction that had simmered between them for weeks blazed to life, but still she hesitated. Good sense warring with desire. "I can't be your— whatever it is you're asking." Her voice barely a whisper. "I won't be any man's convenience." "Is that what you think?" He stepped back as if slapped. "That I see you as convenient? Then what? What is this between us?" He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking vulnerable. "Hell if I know. All I know is I can't watch them tear you apart. Can't stand seeing you hurt. I don't need rescuing. No, You need someone who sees you for what you are. His gaze burned into hers. Strong, brave, too damn good for this place. Eleanor felt walls crumbling inside her, defenses she'd built carefully over years. Jed, come with me, he said suddenly. Just for tonight. Not for what you're thinking, just come with me. Against every instinct of self-preservation, she nodded. They walked in silence through empty streets, past the last buildings, into the desert. His cabin appeared like a sanctuary in the darkness. Inside, he lit a lamp, poured whiskey from a dusty bottle. Eleanor took the glass gratefully, liquid courage burning down her throat. Why did you really come here? She asked. To Cedar Falls. A man like you could go anywhere. He stared into his own glass. Running, same as you, from things that don't wash off, no matter how much distance you put between. The war, among other things. He drained his whiskey. Did things in the name of duty that, well, some nights I still see their faces. Eleanor moved without thinking, placing her hand over his. We all have ghosts. Jed. He turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. What are yours? A husband who died hating me for not being the wife he wanted. A town back east that whispered I'd poisoned him. Though consumption took him plain as day. Years of being looked through like glass, touched without feeling. She met his eyes. I'm 32 years old, and sometimes I wonder if I've ever really lived. Eleanor. Her name was rough on his lips. You're the most alive person I've met. I don't feel it. I feel empty, cold. The whiskey made her bold. Except when you look at me, then I burn. Something shifted in his expression. Don't say things like that. Why? Because it's improper. I'm already ruined in their eyes. She stood, pacing to the window. I'm tired of being proper, tired of being good. Where has it gotten me? You don't know what you're asking. She whirled to face him. Don't I? You think I don't lie awake nights thinking about your hands? About what it would feel like to... She broke off, face flaming. He was on his feet instantly, crossing to her. Eleanor, stop! No. Desperation made her reckless. I'm tired of stopping, tired of being careful. She reached for his shirt, fingers trembling. I need to feel something real, something that's mine. He caught her wrists gently. Not like this. Not when you're hurting and not thinking clear. The rejection stung worse than all the town's whispers combined. Of course, even you don't really want... Don't! His grip tightened. Don't you dare think that. Then why? Because you deserve better than a quick tumble born of pain and whiskey. His voice was strained. Because tomorrow you'll hate yourself and me. Because I care too damn much to be another regret in your life. Eleanor stared at him, seeing past the walls for once. You care? Instead of answering, he pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair. For a moment they stood frozen, breathing each other in. Then his mouth found hers, and Eleanor's world exploded. This was nothing like her husband's dry pecs or the wet assault Watson had attempted. This was fire and need and a hunger that matched her own. She pressed closer, feeling the solid warmth of him, tasting whiskey and want. He broke away, breathing hard. Eleanor, please. Pride abandoned. She tugged at his belt. Make me feel worthy. Make me feel wanted, just once. You are worthy. He caught her hands again, brought them to his lips. That's why we're stopping. Tears spilled over then, hot with frustration and rejection. I'm such a fool. No. He pulled her close again, but differently. Protective rather than passionate. You're human. You're hurting. And you're the bravest woman I've met. She cried against his chest while he held her, one hand stroking her hair. Gradually, the storm passed, leaving her exhausted and embarrassed. I should go, she mumbled. Like hell, it's late, and you're in no state to walk back. He guided her to the bed. Sleep. I'll take the chair. Too drained to argue. Eleanor lay down fully clothed, but sleep wouldn't come. She watched him in the chair, profile outlined by dying firelight. Jed? Thank you for stopping, for being better than I was tonight." He turned to look at her. Wasn't about being better, was about wanting it to be right when it happens. When? A ghost of a smile. When, not if. Eleanor's heart stuttered. Promise? Eleanor Whitmore, when I finally take you to bed, it won't be because you're running from pain. It'll be because you're running towards something. Toward me. His voice dropped. And when that happens, I'll make you feel so worthy you'll forget you ever doubted it. She shivered at the promise in his words. I'll hold you to that. I'm counting on it. She drifted off then, feeling safer than she had in years. When she woke at dawn, she found him still in the chair, still watching over her. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. A promise, an understanding, a future still unwritten. Eleanor rose, smoothed her wrinkled dress. I should get back, see what's left of my life in town. It'll be there. He stood too, stretching stiff muscles. And, Eleanor, next time they come at you, remember, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. Let them choke on their own poison. She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. At the door, she paused. When will I see you again? Whenever you need me. Simple. Sure. Eleanor walked back to town with her head high, still feeling the ghost of his kiss, the safety of his arms. Yes, she was ruined in their eyes, but for the first time, she understood that their opinion meant nothing. She was Eleanor Whitmore. She had survived worse than small-town gossip, and somewhere in the desert, a complicated man with gentle hands was waiting for her to stop running from life and start running toward it, toward him. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. 3 weeks had passed since that night in Jed's cabin. Eleanor moved through her days like a woman divided, outwardly maintaining her rigid composure, inwardly burning with confusion and longing. She hadn't seen him since, though she'd felt his presence. Fresh game appeared on her doorstep. Her woodpile mysteriously replenished itself. Small signs that he watched over her even from a distance. The town's hostility had crystallized into cold indifference. Parents pulled their remaining children from school. The general store refused her credit. Even the hotel restaurant wouldn't serve her. She survived on pride and the mysterious provisions. But barely. This morning brought a new crisis. The landlord, Mr. Pembroke, stood in her doorway with an eviction notice. Nothing personal, Miss Whitmore, but I've got a reputation to consider. End of the week. Eleanor took the paper with steady hands. I understand. After he left, she sat at her empty desk in the abandoned schoolhouse, finally allowing despair to creep in. She'd fought so hard to maintain her independence, her dignity. But what good was dignity when you were starving and homeless? The door burst open. Tommy Morrison rushed in, face flushed with panic. Miss Whitmore, you gotta come quick. They got Mr. Hartwell. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. What? Who has him? The Donnelly gang. They came for water, and he wouldn't let them take his horses. They beat him something awful, dragged him toward the old mine. She was moving before the boy finished speaking. Tommy, run to whoever's left in town. Tell them... She paused. Would anyone help Jed? Tell them the gang is here. Go! Eleanor grabbed the rifle from behind her desk, a recent addition after Watson's visit. She had 5 bullets and barely knew how to use it, but she'd be damned if she'd do nothing. The ride to the mine took 20 minutes that felt like hours. She heard them before she saw them, rough laughter echoing from the shaft entrance. Eleanor dismounted, approaching on foot, rifle clutched in sweating palms. 5 men lounged around the mine entrance. Jed knelt in their midst, hands tied, blood running from a cut above his eye. Even beaten, he radiated dangerous calm. Well, the apparent leader, a scarred man with dead eyes, noticed her approach. Lady coming to watch the show? Eleanor raised the rifle. Let him go. The men laughed. The leader, Donnelly himself, she realized, stood lazily. That's supposed to scare us. Schoolmarm? I said let him go. Her voice stayed steady despite her terror. Jed's head snapped up. Eleanor, get out of here. Shut up. Donnelly backhanded him casually, then focused on Eleanor. Pretty thing like you, all alone. Maybe we take you along when we're done with him. Try it. She cocked the rifle. I might miss some of you, but not all. Donnelly's amusement faded. You're that woman been warming his bed, the widow teacher. His smile turned ugly. Boy's been lonely. Might be you could convince us to let him go. You're nice enough. Eleanor's stomach churned, but she kept the rifle steady. I'll put a bullet in my own head before I let you touch me. Eleanor, no. Jed struggled against his bonds. Just go, please. She met his eyes. I'm done running. Jed, done being afraid. To Donnelly, you want to kill him? You'll have to kill me too. And whoever comes looking will find both our bodies. That the kind of attention you want? Donnelly considered this. The gang had survived by avoiding too much notoriety. 2 murdered citizens might bring federal marshals. Counteroffer, he said finally. We take the horses, some supplies. Leave you both breathing. No horses, Eleanor said. You can have food, water, ammunition, but you leave the horses and you leave now. One of the gang members spoke up. Boss, sun's getting high. We need to move. Donnelly weighed options. Finally, he shrugged. Fine, but the schoolmarm here loads our supplies personal-like. Want to make sure she doesn't get creative. The next hour passed in tense negotiation. Eleanor loaded their saddlebags with provisions from Jed's cabin, aware of guns trained on them both. When they finally rode out, she collapsed against the cabin wall, rifle clattering from nerveless fingers. Jed was beside her instantly, freed from his bonds. What the hell were you thinking? They could have... But they didn't. She touched the cut on his face. You're hurt. I've had worse. He caught her hand. Eleanor, you could have been killed. Why? You know why. The words came out raw. I couldn't lose you. Not when I've just found you. Something broke in his expression. He pulled her against him roughly, his mouth finding hers with desperate hunger. This kiss was nothing like their first. All pretense stripped away. Just need and fear and relief. When they broke apart, Eleanor was crying. I thought they'd kill you. Takes more than 5 men to put me down. He wiped her tears with his thumb. But seeing you there with that rifle? Christ, Eleanor. Bravest and stupidest thing I've ever seen. I had to... I know. He kissed her again. Softer. I know. They treated his wounds in comfortable silence. Eleanor finally returning to town as dusk fell. But everything had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by something raw and undeniable. The next morning, she woke to pounding on her door. Sheriff Watson's replacement, a nervous man named Collins, stood outside. Miss Whitmore, you need to come to the jail. Her heart sank. Is this about yesterday? Just come, ma'am. The jail held surprises. Donnelly sat in a cell, sporting fresh bruises and a sullen expression. And in the sheriff's office, Jed waited with 2 federal marshals. Miss Whitmore. The senior marshal tipped his hat. Mister, Hartwell here tracked the Donnelly gang to their camp last night, brought their leader in personally. Eleanor stared at Jed. You went after them? Alone? He shrugged. They threatened you. That changed things. The marshal continued. There's a substantial bounty on Donnelly. Mister, Hartwell insisted it go to you. I don't want $500. The marshal interrupted. Enough for a fresh start anywhere you choose. Eleanor felt the world tilt. $500 was a fortune. Freedom. Escape. Everything she'd thought she wanted. I need air. She fled outside. Jed following. It's yours, he said quietly. No strings. You can leave tonight if you want. Is that what you want? For me to leave? He laughed bitterly. What I want hasn't mattered in years. It matters to me. She faced him fully. Tell me what you want, Jed. A long moment passed. Wind stirred dust devils in the street. Finally, he spoke. I want you to stay. Want to wake up knowing you're close. Want to stop pretending I don't need you like air. He met her eyes. But I've got no right to ask that. You deserve better than a broken-down soldier and a town that hates you. Eleanor felt something settle inside her, like a key finding its lock. You're right. I do deserve better. His face shuddered, but she continued. I deserve a man who sees my strength, who trusts me to make my own choices, who'd face down 5 killers for me. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Eleanor, I deserve you. Jed Hartwell, if you'll have me. He crossed to her in 2 strides, lifting her off her feet, kissing her senseless in the middle of Main Street. Let them watch, Eleanor thought dizzily. Let them gossip. She was done caring. When he set her down, she was breathless but certain. There's an old homestead for sale outside town, the Baxter place, with $500. We could fix it up. He finished. Make it livable. You think I'm letting you out of my sight now? His smile was possessive. You're stuck with me, school marm. Good. She leaned into him. Because I'm tired of being cold. Jed, tired of empty nights and empty dreams. No more empty nights. He promised against her hair. Not ever again. They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher. Witnesses dragged reluctantly from the saloon. Eleanor wore her best dress, still plain by any standard. But Jed looked at her like she wore silk and diamonds. That night, in their rough homestead with walls that needed patching and floors that creaked, he kept every promise his eyes had ever made. She discovered that beneath his controlled exterior lay passion deep enough to drown in, gentle enough to heal her wounded heart. Still feeling unworthy? He asked afterward, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. No. She pressed closer, marveling at the solid warmth of him. For the first time in my life, I feel whole. Good. He tilted her face up. Because you're going to be feeling worthy every night for the rest of your life. That's a promise. Eleanor smiled against his mouth. I'll hold you to that, Mr. Hartwell. I'm counting on it, Mrs. Hartwell. Outside, coyotes called to the rising moon. Inside, 2 damaged souls found solace in each other, building something new from the ashes of their pasts. It wasn't the life Eleanor had planned, but wrapped in Jed's arms, listening to his heartbeat in the dark. She knew it was the life she'd been meant to live. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The town would never fully accept them. The land was harsh and unforgiving. But tonight, she was loved, wanted, worthy. Tonight, that was enough. Tonight, it was everything. The jail cell reeked of unwashed bodies and fear. Eleanor knelt beside Jed, her hands gentle on his battered face. 3 days after capturing Donnelly, vigilantes had stormed their homestead in the night, dragging Jed to town on trumped-up charges of murder, claiming he'd killed a man in cold blood years ago in Kansas. Don't look at me like that, Jed muttered, wincing as she cleaned a gash on his cheek. Like I'm dying. You're not dying. Her voice was fierce. Because I won't let you. Sheriff Collins hovered nervously by the door. Ma'am, I've got to lock up soon. Then lock up. Eleanor didn't move. I'm not leaving him. The circuit judge comes next week. They're talking about a rope. Mrs. Hartwell. Maybe you should prepare. Get out. The ice in her voice sent Collins scurrying. When they were alone, Jed caught her hand. Eleanor, listen. There's truth in what they're saying. I did kill a man in Kansas. During the war. I don't care. You should. His grip tightened. He was a Confederate officer, surrendered, but I wasn't right in the head then. Saw too many friends die. When I found him with dispatches about a planned raid on a hospital, he closed his eyes. I shot him. No trial. No mercy. Eleanor absorbed this, then squeezed his hand back. Was the raid real? Yes, we stopped it. Saved maybe 50 wounded men. Then you made a choice in war. That doesn't make you a murderer. Law might disagree. He pulled her close through the bars. If this goes bad, it won't. She pressed her forehead to his. "I'll tear this town apart before I let them touch you." That night, Eleanor sat in their empty homestead, planning. The $500 from Donnelly's bounty was still untouched. She could hire a lawyer from the territorial capital, but that would take time Jed didn't have. The town's bloodlust was rising, fed by old prejudices and new fear. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door cautiously to find an unexpected visitor, Judge Samuel Pritchard, Reverend Pritchard's older brother. The old man leaned heavily on a cane, his face weathered but sharp. "May I come in, Mrs. Hartwell?" Eleanor stepped aside warily. The judge settled into a chair with a grunt, studying her with keen eyes. "You're planning something," he said without preamble. "I can see it. Same look my wife had when she was fixing to raise hell." "I don't know what you mean." He chuckled. "Girl, I've been judging people for 30 years. You're about to do something desperate for that man of yours." Eleanor's chin lifted. "If the law won't protect him, I will." "And how do you plan to do that? Storm the jail? Shoot the town?" "If necessary." The judge leaned forward. "There's another way, but it'll cost you more than money." "Name it." "My brother leads that lynch mob in all but name. He's convinced Hartwell is the devil's own spawn. But Samuel has a weakness: his reputation, his standing as a moral leader." The judge's smile was sharp. "You could destroy that." Eleanor frowned. "How?" "You know the Morrison family left town. The boy, Tommy, he told me something interesting before they went, about seeing my brother meeting with Watson and others, planning to drive out undesirable elements. Planning violence. Tommy saw this? Heard it, more like. Boy's got a talent for being where he shouldn't." The judge pulled out a paper. He wrote it down, signed it, been waiting for someone with courage enough to use it. Eleanor took the document with shaking hands. It detailed meetings, plans, threats, enough to destroy Reverend Pritchard's reputation, possibly see him arrested. "Why give this to me? Because my brother's become something twisted, and because your husband, whatever his past, stood against the Donnelly gang when no one else would. He stood painfully. Use it wisely, publicly. Make it impossible for them to hang Hartwell without hanging their own." After he left, Eleanor sat studying the weapon she'd been given. By morning, she'd made her choice. The church was packed for Sunday service. Eleanor entered late, letting the doors bang shut, every head turned. She walked up the aisle in her best dress, the one she'd married Jed in, her head high despite the whispers. "I have something to say," she announced. Reverend Pritchard's face purpled. "This is God's house. Then let's talk about God's truth." She turned to face the congregation. "You sit here, plotting to murder my husband, calling him killer while ignoring the killers among you. How dare—" Eleanor held up Tommy's statement. "How dare I? How dare you, Reverend? Planning violence, meeting in secret, driving out families whose only crime was being different?" She began to read. The church erupted. Denials, shouts, misses. Garrison fainting dramatically. But Eleanor continued, her voice cutting through chaos like a blade. "You want justice?" She faced them all. "Then let's have it. Real justice. In a court of law. Not at the end of a rope. Your husband murdered a man," someone shouted. "In war, protecting wounded soldiers, while you sat safe at home." Eleanor's contempt was withering. "He's bled for this country. What have any of you done but whisper and scheme?" The judge stood slowly. "The lady makes a point. As circuit judge, I'm ordering Hartwell held for proper trial. Any vigilante action will be met with federal intervention." His gaze swept the crowd. "And I'll be investigating these allegations against my brother and others. Conspiracy charges carry heavy penalties." The crowd's mood shifted, uncertainty replacing bloodlust. Eleanor pressed her advantage. "My husband saved Samuel Brennan, captured Donnelly, protected this town while you cowered." She moved toward the door. "You don't deserve him, but you'll give him justice, or I'll see this town burn to ash around you." She left them in stunned silence, but she wasn't done. That afternoon, She sent telegrams to newspapers in the territorial capital, to the federal marshal's office, to anyone who might listen. The story of a war hero falsely accused, a town corrupted by prejudice, a woman fighting alone for justice. By evening, Cedar Falls was buzzing with new energy. Federal marshals arrived to investigate the conspiracy allegations. A lawyer from the capital, intrigued by the telegrams, offered to defend Jed pro bono. The town found itself under scrutiny it hadn't expected. Eleanor was allowed extended visits with Jed, who watched her campaign with a mixture of awe and concern. "You're making powerful enemies," he warned. "Good." She gripped his hands through the bars. "Let them come." "Eleanor, no, they tried to break us apart, tried to make me ashamed of loving you." Her eyes blazed. "I'm done being their victim, done apologizing for choosing you." He pulled her close as the bars allowed. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You saw me," she said simply. "Really saw me. Not the proper widow or the spinster teacher. Me. I see you now too." His voice was rough. "See a warrior, a force of nature. My fierce, brilliant wife." The trial came 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from 3 newspapers present. Eleanor sat in the front row, her presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. The prosecution's case fell apart quickly. The alleged murder victim turned out to be a Confederate spy responsible for multiple civilian deaths. Witnesses came forward, soldiers Jed had saved, families he'd protected. The lawyer Eleanor's telegrams had attracted was brilliant, painting a picture of a hero haunted by necessary choices. But the real turning point came when Eleanor herself took the stand. Not as a witness to facts, but as a character witness. She spoke of the man who'd saved Samuel Brennan, who'd protected her from Sheriff Watson, who'd faced down 5 killers to keep the town safe. "You ask who Jed Hartwell is?" She looked directly at the jury. "He's a man who carries the weight of every life he's taken and every life he's saved, who chose isolation rather than inflict his pain on others, who stepped forward when needed, despite how this town treated him." She turned to look at Jed. "He's the man who taught me that surviving isn't living, that being safe isn't the same as being whole, that sometimes the greatest courage is letting someone see your scars." Her voice dropped, intimate despite the crowd. "He's my husband, my choice, and I'd choose him again every day for the rest of my life, no matter what you decide here." The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Not guilty. The crowd erupted, some in celebration, others in fury. But Eleanor had eyes only for Jed as he was released. Crossing to her in 3 strides and lifting her into his arms, "It's over," she whispered. "No." He set her down gently, framing her face with his hands. "It's just beginning." They left the courthouse together, past the remnants of a town that had tried to destroy them. Some faces showed grudging respect, others, lasting hatred. But none of that mattered now. "We could leave," Jed said as they reached their horses. "Start fresh somewhere else." Eleanor considered, then shook her head. "No, we built something here. Our home, our life. They don't get to take that." He smiled, the first full, unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him. "Have I mentioned lately that you're magnificent? You can mention it again tonight," she said, suddenly shy, planning on it. He helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse. "Every night for the rest of our lives." They rode home as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, Cedar Falls wrestled with its conscience. Ahead, their small homestead waited, rough and imperfect, but theirs. "No more cages," Eleanor said softly. "No more cages," Jed agreed. "For either of us." She reached over, taking his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being worth fighting for." His fingers tightened around hers. "Eleanor, I should be thanking you. You gave me back my life, my hope, my heart. Then we're even." She smiled. "Partners. Partners," he echoed. "In everything." The stars emerged one by one as they rode. 2 souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and refused to let go. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that, Eleanor thought, was worth any battle. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, water-stained and travel-worn. Eleanor read it 3 times before the words sank in. The bank had sold her late husband's remaining debts to collectors who wanted immediate payment. $300 she didn't have, her small inheritance, already depleted, couldn't cover it. They gave her 2 weeks before they'd seize any assets they could find. Jed found her sitting at their rough kitchen table, the letter crumpled in her fist. "What's wrong?" she explained tonelessly, the weight of it crushing. After everything they'd survived, to be brought low by old debts seemed cruelly unfair. "We have money left from the bounty," Jed said. $60. Not nearly enough. She laughed bitterly. "And I won't let you sell your horses or guns. You need those to work. Then we'll find another way." But what way? Eleanor spent the next days in a haze of worry. The school remained closed to her. No income there. The town's merchants still refused her credit. Every avenue seemed blocked. On the 4th night, she made a decision that shattered something inside her. While Jed was out checking trap lines, Eleanor packed her few belongings. She left a note on the table. "I won't let my past destroy our future. By the time you read this, I'll be on the stage to Denver. I'll find work, send money when I can. Please don't follow me. Let me spare you this burden. You deserve better than a wife who brings nothing but debt and trouble. Be happy, E." She walked to town through the desert darkness, every step in agony. At the stage depot, she used precious coins for a ticket on the dawn coach. Then she waited, hollow-eyed, as the sky lightened. The stage was loading when thundering hooves made her turn. Jed rode hard down Main Street, his face a mask of fury and fear. He swung down before his horse fully stopped. "Get your things," he said quietly. Too quietly. "Jed, please understand. Get your things." Each word was granite. Eleanor retrieved her small bag, following him to where he'd tied his horse. Neither spoke during the ride home, inside their cabin. Jed finally faced her, and the pain in his eyes broke her heart. "This is what you think of me?" He held up her note. "That I'd let you face anything alone? That I care more about money than my wife? I was trying to protect you. From what? From loving you? Too late for that." He crumpled the note, threw it in the fireplace. "You want to run? We run together. You want to fight? We fight together. That's what marriage means. But the debt will be paid, one way or another." He pulled her against him roughly. "But don't you ever try to leave me again. You understand?" Eleanor nodded against his chest, tears falling freely. "I'm sorry, I couldn't bear to drag you down." "Woman, you lifted me up from the minute you walked into my life." His voice gentled. "Whatever comes, we face it. Together." That night, wrapped in his arms, Eleanor felt the wild idea take shape. "There's one thing worth enough money," she said into the darkness. "What?" "Mustangs, wild horses in the canyons north of here. If we could catch them, break them, sell them to the army." Jed was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "Dangerous work. Those canyons are rough, and wild horses don't gentle easy." "Since when have we chosen easy?" She felt him smile against her hair. "Point taken. We'd need help, though. Ropes, extra hands." "Tommy Morrison," Eleanor said suddenly. "Before his family left, he mentioned his uncle still lived near Serpent Canyon. Runs Mustangs sometimes." "Worth a try." Jed pulled her closer. "But Eleanor, if this doesn't work, then we'll try something else." She turned in his arms. "But we try together." 3 days later, they set out for Serpent Canyon. The landscape grew increasingly hostile. Red rocks twisted into fantastic shapes. Dry washes that could flood in minutes. Sun that scorched and night winds that cut like knives. They found Ben Morrison's camp on the 4th day. Tommy's uncle was a weathered man of 50. Suspicious until he heard Eleanor's name. "You're the teacher who stood up for my nephew," he said. "Tommy wrote me about you. Said you were the only one in that town worth spit." Eleanor explained their situation. Ben listened, then spat tobacco juice thoughtfully. Mustanging ain't charity work. It's dangerous, back-breaking, and half the time you come up empty. We're not asking for charity. Jed said, just a chance. Ben studied them. You ever work horses, soldier boy? Some, during the war. And you, schoolmarm? You ready to eat dust, sleep on rocks, maybe get trampled? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I'm ready for whatever it takes. Ben grinned. Tommy said you had sand. All right, we split whatever we catch 3 ways. You pull your weight, follow my lead, and maybe we all come out ahead. The next weeks were the hardest of Eleanor's life. They rose before dawn, setting traps in box canyons, building brush fences to funnel the horses. When they finally spotted a band, 15 horses led by a magnificent black stallion, the real work began. The chase lasted 3 days. Eleanor rode until her muscles screamed, drove horses through passes so narrow her knees scraped rock. She learned to rope, to read the land, to anticipate the wild horses' moves. Her hands blistered, split, hardened, her skin burned, then tanned. She'd never been more exhausted or more alive. Jed was in his element, competent, focused. The natural leader he'd been in war translated to this harsh peace. Watching him work, Eleanor understood another facet of the man she'd married. He needed purpose, challenge, something to pit himself against besides memories. The breakthrough came when they finally trapped 7 horses in a blind canyon. The black stallion had escaped with half the band, but 7 would bring good money if they could break them. Now the fun starts, Ben said grimly. Breaking wild horses was nothing like Eleanor had imagined. It wasn't about domination, but partnership, earning trust through patience and consistency. Jed had a gift for it, his damaged soul recognizing kindred spirits in the frightened animals. Eleanor focused on a young mare, dusty brown with intelligent eyes. Day after day, she worked with the horse, talking softly, moving slowly. The first time the mare took food from her hand, Eleanor nearly wept. She's starting to trust you, Jed observed one evening. I know the feeling. Eleanor replied, being wild and scared, then finding someone patient enough to see past it. He kissed her softly. You were never wild, just free. 2 weeks later, all 7 horses were saddle broke. Ben knew an Army purchasing agent in Fort Union who paid fair prices. The ride there took 4 days. Eleanor, proud atop the mare she'd gentled. The agent, Captain Harris, examined the horses with professional interest. Good stock, healthy, well broke. He named a price that made Eleanor's heart leap, enough to pay the debt with money left over. Business concluded. They celebrated in Fort Union's single restaurant. Ben raised his whiskey glass. 2 partners who pull their weight. 2 new beginnings. Eleanor added, to finding what you need when you need it most. Jed finished. The ride home was lighter despite their exhaustion. Eleanor had discovered strength she didn't know existed. Jed had found purpose beyond mere survival, and they'd proven that together. They could overcome anything. Cedar Falls looked smaller when they returned. Several townspeople stared at Eleanor, trail-worn, sun-darkened, riding with easy confidence. This wasn't the proper schoolteacher they'd known. At the bank, Eleanor placed the money on the counter with satisfaction. Payment in full for the Whitmore debt. The banker counted it twice. Clearly disappointed. This concludes our business, Mrs. Hartwell. Yes, Eleanor smiled. It does. Outside, Jed caught her hand. How does it feel, being free? Like I can breathe for the first time in years. She looked at their clasped hands, his scarred from war and work, hers newly calloused from ropes and reins. What now? Now we go home, run our own horses, build something that's ours. Together. Always together. They rode toward their homestead as storm clouds gathered, promising rain the desert desperately needed. Eleanor thought about the woman who'd arrived in Cedar Falls 3 years ago. Proper, contained, afraid. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wilder, more honest. No regrets, Jed asked, reading her mood as always. None. Eleanor urged her mare forward, calling back over her shoulder. Race you home, he laughed, full and free, and gave chase. They thundered across the desert, two souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and forged something unbreakable from their shared strength. The first fat raindrops fell as they reached their cabin, and Eleanor tilted her face to the sky, letting the water wash away the last of her old life. She was Eleanor Hartwell now, mustanger, fighter, survivor, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly who she was meant to be. The storm that had promised relief became a deluge. For 3 days, rain hammered the desert, turning dry washes into raging torrents. Eleanor and Jed worked frantically to protect their horses and meager possessions, but by the third night, it was clear they couldn't stay. The creek's rising, Jed observed. Water already lapping at their door. We need to move to higher ground. They saddled their horses in the driving rain, packing what they could carry. The mustangs they'd been breaking whinnied nervously in the corral, sensing danger. We can't leave them, Eleanor shouted over the storm. We can't drive them all in this weather, Jed replied, but he was already moving toward the corral. We'll turn them loose, give them a chance. They opened the gates, and the horses scattered into the night. Eleanor's heart broke watching months of work disappear, but there was no choice. They rode hard for the abandoned church on the hill above Cedar Falls, the only structure that might withstand the flooding. The town was in chaos when they arrived. Families fled rising water, belongings hastily loaded on wagons. The old division seemed petty now. Faced with nature's indifference, the church became a refuge. Eleanor found herself organizing supplies, tending injured, keeping frightened children calm. Jed worked tirelessly, helping evacuate flooded homes, reinforcing the church doors against the wind. Look at you, Mrs., Henderson said wonderingly, watching Eleanor bandage a child's cut. I misjudged you terribly. Eleanor didn't pause in her work. We all misjudged each other. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving devastation in its wake. Half of Cedar Falls lay underwater. The schoolhouse was gone. The jail, several homes, most of Main Street, all swept away or damaged beyond repair. Standing in the church doorway, surveying the wreckage, Reverend Pritchard looked older, smaller. Perhaps this is judgment, he said quietly, for our hardness of heart, our failure of charity. Eleanor touched his shoulder. Then it's also a chance for redemption. The rebuilding began immediately. Without discussion, old feuds were set aside. Everyone had lost something. Everyone needed help. Jed's strength and experience proved invaluable. Eleanor's organizational skills kept efforts focused. 2 weeks into the recovery, a miracle, 5 of their released mustangs returned, including Eleanor's brown mare. They were scraggly, muddy, but alive. Smart horses, Ben Morrison said, having come to help. Knew where safety was. It was while clearing debris from their flooded homestead that Jed made the discovery. The flood had washed away part of a hill, revealing something unexpected. A vein of silver ore, small but promising. Keep it quiet, Ben advised when they showed him. News like this brings the wrong kind of attention. They filed the claim secretly, working the mine carefully between other tasks. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to rebuild properly. Enough to help others do the same. Enough to finally feel secure. The town that emerged from the flood was different. Humbler. Perhaps more united. When Eleanor suggested reopening the school, the response was unanimous support, even Mrs. Garrison donated books. Seems foolish now, the woman admitted. All that judgment. You saved my grandson during the storm. That matters more than the other things. The new schoolhouse was built on high ground, larger than before. The day it opened, 40 students enrolled, including several who'd left and returned. Eleanor stood before them, no longer the rigid woman who'd first arrived in Cedar Falls. Education, she began, isn't just about books. It's about learning to see clearly, to think for ourselves. To treat others with the respect we hope to receive. She smiled. Let's learn together. That evening, she found Jed working with their horses. Their cabin, rebuilt stronger than before, glowed warmly in the setting sun. He looked up at her approach, and the love in his eyes still took her breath away. Good day? He asked. The best. She leaned against the fence beside him. I actually feel part of this place now. Not just surviving here, but belonging. You've earned it. He pulled her close. We both have. They stood together, watching the horses graze peacefully. The brown mare approached, nuzzling Eleanor's hand for treats. Remember when you couldn't get near her? Jed asked. Remember when you couldn't get near anyone? Eleanor countered. He laughed. Point taken. After a moment, he added, I've been thinking about the future. Oh, the mine's producing steady. The horse business is growing. We could expand, maybe bring in some breeding stock, build something lasting. Eleanor heard what he wasn't saying. A real home, a legacy, maybe even children. I'd like that, she said softly. Yeah? Yeah. She turned in his arms. But Jed, I need you to know something first. His expression grew concerned. What? That first night, when I came to your door bleeding and afraid, I was running to safety, yes, but I was also running to you. Some part of me knew even then that you were home. He cupped her face gently. Eleanor, you saved me. From the darkness. From myself. You made me believe I could be more than my worst moments. We saved each other, she corrected. That's what partners do, as if in agreement. Thunder rumbled in the distance, not threatening now, but promising. The desert was blooming after the floods, transformed by disaster into something unexpectedly beautiful. Dance with me, Jed said suddenly. Here, now. Why not? He pulled her into motion. No music but a wind and distant thunder. We've earned a little joy. They danced in the dust and dying light. Two people who'd found each other against all odds. Eleanor thought of the woman she'd been, prideful, frightened, alone. That woman would never have believed this possible. What are you thinking? Jed asked. That I was wrong before. I said I needed to feel worthy. She met his eyes. But worthiness isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you claim for yourself. And have you claimed it? Every day, she said. Every time I choose love over fear. Every time I stand in front of those children, teaching them to be brave. Every time I wake up beside you and know I'm exactly where I belong. He spun her once more, then pulled her close. I love you, Eleanor Hartwell, and I love you, Jed, more than I thought possible. The stars emerged one by one, witnesses to their quiet joy. In the distance, Cedar Falls prepared for sleep, a town reborn, imperfect but trying, and at its edge, in a cabin built by their own hands, two souls who'd traveled through darkness stood in the light they'd made together. No more running, Eleanor said. From anything or anyone, no more running. Jed agreed. We're home. She smiled up at him. Yes, we are. And in that moment, with the vast desert stretching endlessly around them and the infinite sky above, Eleanor knew the deepest truth of all. Home wasn't a place. It was this man's arms, this shared strength, this choice to face whatever came as one. They'd begun as strangers in a harsh land, two damaged people trying to survive. They'd become partners, lovers, friends, and now, standing together in the gathering darkness, they were simply, completely, eternally home. The brown mare whinnied softly, the sound carrying across the desert like a benediction, and Eleanor Whitmore Hartwell, once too proud to beg, too scared to trust, too wounded to hope, discovered that the greatest courage of all was the quiet bravery of choosing love, again and again, for all the days to come. In the abandoned church that had sheltered them from the storm, moonlight fell through empty windows onto rough wooden floors, but the walls still stood, scarred but strong, like the town, like the love between a bitter soldier and a proud teacher who'd found in each other the grace to begin again. And that, Eleanor thought as Jed led her inside their home, was the finest lesson of all. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of frontier romance. Please leave a comment below sharing your location and thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let us know what touched your heart in Eleanor and Jed's journey. Your support keeps these stories alive.